Okay, hello everyone, and thanks for attending the webinar today, Facebook versus Australia, Who Controls Who? My name is Lou Kerner, and I'm CEO of BIGtoken, and we're an app that you can download, and then you share our data with us. We anonymize it, monetize it, and share the revenue with our users. And our mission is to enable people to own and monetize their data, and a pillar of our belief is that data privacy is a human right. And so, we're super excited for, for this call today. I think, we have really three thought leaders on this topic. The first is Gilbert Hall, who's a privacy technologist. I didn't even know that was a thing before I saw his LinkedIn profile. And I'm actually looking forward to, to Gilbert. He's a co-host with me and hosting future webinars that we do on this topic. And so, Gilbert, you want to quickly intro yourself?
Thanks, Lou. Nice to meet you all virtually. Yeah, as Lou mentioned, my name's Gilbert Hill. I'm a privacy technologist and an entrepreneur. I got the kind of bug for privacy about 5 years ago with the advent of the original EU cookie law, and I've never kind of looked back. And we ended up building a compliance solution around cookies. And for the last 2 years, I've been CEO of Tap My Data, which builds tools for people to start to take back control and exercise their rights under GDPR, with blockchain keeping the score. And that's me.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Gilbert. And we've got two great panelists with us today, including Jody Rich with People Browser, who is really the genesis of this call. Jody's a friend, and he sent me an article that he had written on this topic, and I thought it was a super important topic. I'd said one of my claims to fame is that I was the first person to call Mark Zuckerberg and offer to buy the company about a month after he launched. I was running a company called Bolt at the time, and we were buying up companies generally started by 16, 18, 20-year-old kids. And so watching the arc of it from then, and actually being very, very involved with the company as an investor for a number of years, it's been an incredible arc to watch. And again, reading Jody's piece that he wrote last week, I thought it was a lot of great insights, and I thought it was just a really important topic. And so super excited to have this call. So Jody, thanks for being the genesis, and a quick intro about yourself.
Thank you very much, Lou. And I should be wearing my glasses because they're just like yours. And I think we do refer to ourselves as bald brothers.
Yeah.
I was born in...
show off.
It's upside down.
Yeah, perfect. I'll work on mine for next time we're doing a webinar together, Gilbert. So I was born in New York, went to school in Australia. I see myself as a global citizen. I've always been very, very fascinated by technology that helps us as human beings sort of move to the next stage. And I deeply believe that collaborative technology, collaborative platforms are essential for us to be able to solve the big problems like climate change and pandemics and building robust democracies. And so for the last 10 years, I've been running a company called People Browser that builds collaborative applications and tools for influencers and brands. And collaboration really means starting with digital identity. And digital identity is about profiles. It's about your profile. It's about your contacts, and it's about your conversations. And so my interest in Facebook v Australia, like Lou, many, many years ago, we started doing analytics with Twitter and Facebook, and we've sort of seen these platforms become dominant players. And so my interest in this webinar is getting together with you guys to talk about really what will be the next, what will come out of Facebook v Australia.
So terrific. Thanks, Jody. And so I wrote Jody, I said, hey, this is a great article. How about doing a webinar? He wrote back, that would be great. What else do I need to do? And I said, you need to find a second speaker. And so here we are with Brittany Kaiser, and I had the pleasure of watching The Great Hack last night, which was a super interesting and entertaining and movie. And so thank you for that. And just in the few minutes that we were chatting beforehand, also I don't think there was any mention in the movie, or was there? I mean, I can't believe they wouldn't have mentioned it, that that you had worked with Chris Hughes on the Obama campaign. But if they mentioned that passed me by, but I thought that was super interesting. So again, my guess is most people already know who you are, but why don't for the 2 or 3 people who might not, just give us a quick bio.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for giving us a platform to talk about what I think is one of the most interesting and perhaps transformational cases that we're dealing with in the space right now. So my name is Brittany Kaiser. You might know me as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. I describe myself as a data rights activist. I have been a technologist since. I was a teenager when I first started working on the Obama campaign. And yes, as you rightly pointed out, that was with Chris Hughes. We had gone to boarding school together, and he had co-founded Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg. And instead of moving to California, he decided to finish his degree at Harvard and join the Obama campaign and start to experiment with different ways of using data at Facebook. So Chris and I were on the team of the people who invented social media strategy. We were the first people to take data off of Facebook and use it for targeted messaging in politics, or for anything at all. And then everyone replicated our strategy and embellished upon it. So I have a long history with Facebook. I really saw it as a net positive in the beginning, and spent many years of my life traveling around the world teaching human rights organizations. I was studying as a human rights lawyer how to use tools like Facebook in order to get out positive messaging, in order to get people to donate and to care about causes that were important, because that's what I had learned how to do on the campaign. And many years later,
one moment, just, and we'll jump to the Facebook Australia thing shortly, but was there a moment like when, in your view, Facebook jumped the shark and they went from, in your view, good to, not so much?
it was really what I saw at Cambridge Analytica. I had joined that company in order to learn how to be the best campaigner I possibly could, and how to use the more advanced tools, especially advanced predictive algorithms, in order to get people to care about issues that I found important. But I found that some of the clients of the company had other plans in mind, and were using the platform in order to influence populations in a negative way, influence people to increase their fear and insecurity, run voter suppression campaigns. And when I saw how you could use Facebook so easily for breaking election laws and for actually creating division in society, that's when I decided to become a whistleblower instead. So my relationship with Facebook is now that I testify against them in Congress, but I still do have I have a Facebook account. It touches nearly so many people on the planet that it's so important for us to have this conversation. And that's why I think that the government of Australia made an incredible move to say this platform is so influential. Even the former head of Facebook Australia said, this has become too powerful. We're influencing too many people. And that's where I came from as a whistleblower, to say something needs to be done in terms of regulation over the past many years.
Yeah, and let's just frame it, frame the conversation. And Jody, again, you wrote the piece, so you want to just help kind of frame the conversation in terms of kind of what happened in Australia for the people who might not know it as well?
Facebook shut down access to all news sites. And for many, many, many people, Facebook is an essential service provider, just like water, just like electricity. People stop watching TV, exactly. People stop watching TV and they use Facebook as their essential provider for communication. And I think Facebook extended their shutdown way too far. I think they made some mistakes in the shutdown. I think that they have caused more problems for themselves by waking people up to the problems of one, Silicon Valley company controlling the essential services in another sovereign state. And so there's been enormous discussion here, and people are watching around the world as the Australian government sort of drew a line in the sand and took a stand against Facebook, which, interestingly, just to add perspective, in July last year, in the House in DC, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, David Cicilline, he made an extraordinary statement about the fourth, what was it? He said, our founders would not bow before a king, nor should we bow before the emperors of the big tech economy. And interestingly, a little country like Australia has been the first to sort of stand up to those emperors. Oops, I can't hear you, Lou.
Yeah. As Gilbert, as you've been watching it unfold, kind of, and you've been doing this, 24/7 now for, a long time, how did you see, did it, I assume it went differently than you thought that it would, or, you were surprised by what the Australian government did and how Facebook responded?
I think it was enlightening because it reminded me how sort of controlled a lot of the media was already. I mean, News Corp owns like 2/3 of Aussie's news market, as well as, the Times and the Sun in the UK, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, etc. And it got me thinking to what extent is this a new paradigm, or as opposed to one empire fighting another. And I think that it's interesting how but it seems to be that both sides are picking their fights. They're lobbying and waiting to see if the other gets overtaken by events, whether that's kind of old age or regulatory action. And I think coming at this from a point of view of a privacy technologist, one of the problematic results of sort of GDPR was it made things tougher for smaller businesses. And the traditional data trade that I understood, from leafleting through to email marketing has been completely disrupted. And obviously what this represents is more power and control flowing to these super dominant players. And companies are sort of focused on a set of legal obligations and are taking this acquiescence of consumers as consent. And I see this as an extension of this. So, I mean, you've got the Facebook situation seems to be one where I can see them coming back to the table. I think it does make me ask not only how much of this new, but how much design is in all this. I mean, Brittany, you must know this. We went from, I was thinking, like from Facebook was kind of like quite sweet and hokey in the early days. They've gone from like pokes to mass manipulation. Like, how much design was in that? Because we've seen politics pick up the ball and run with it.
Well, really, I'm so glad that you specifically addressed the design, because that's one of my main qualms with the Facebook platform and one of the reasons why real news has lost out so much. The Facebook design is really kleptocratic. How much data can we get from how many people? Therefore, they measure their success in clicks, attention, people's time. And unfortunately, in the human psychology, the more fear-based messaging, the more, I suppose, emotional messaging that is more around something that makes you angry, something that makes you anxious. That's what actually drives more clicks and more attention. So you can see how quickly disinformation and fake news, especially news that is made to rile you up, that is made to make you afraid of something that's going in society, to make you hesitate and question something, that's going to be what gets more clicks. And so therefore real news gets pushed to the bottom of the news feed where you might never see it. And anyone and everyone that can come up with the most exponential headline that is going to make you afraid of what's happening, afraid enough to click and try to find out, that's what gets your attention. And so this originally was obviously more designed by people, but now it's artificial intelligence that has learned what people are going to click on and therefore is pushing certain things up in front of our eyes and hiding everything else. Because this model has been proliferated over so many years, it means that real news does not get so much attention. Therefore, real news agencies that actually spend their time and attention on fact checking, on making sure there are no single anonymous sources, on making sure there are ethics imbued in what is written and that real and truthful information is being published, those organizations are losing out because clickbait, fake news, and disinformation is what actually is making Facebook more money. And it's a profit model. that profit model is not being adjusted to abide by laws, and it's definitely not being adjusted to abide by ethics. So over the past few years, what we've seen is that we are continually trying to push platforms like Facebook to do the right thing and create internal ethical policies. And despite the global pressure on them, it's been proven that they are not willing to do so. They will not invest in that internally. So therefore, I'm so glad that there are countries like Australia that have decided to come forward and actually decide to make, I would say, make a statement by picking these types of fights and saying, okay, you need to pay our real news organizations. Otherwise, you're basically monopolizing people's time and attention with unverified information that is possibly harmful to themselves and the rest of society.
Right. And it's interesting. You bring up a couple of things. Well, one, from an analyst standpoint, I was bullish on the company for 8 years. I have a simple belief in social networks that they're either growing their engagement or they're dying. And so, it was their fourth quarter 2017 earnings where their engagement went down for the first time in their history. And on their earnings call, they addressed it by saying the reason it went down is because they decided to stop people from doing the number one thing that people like to do on Facebook, and that was read fake news. And it went down a few quarters, and then when I saw it going up, they never said anything, but my assumption was they decided to let people read fake news and probably even highlight it. And this is the call that was about Facebook versus Australia. And Jodee, as an Australian, how much of it was Facebook versus Australia, and how much of it was Rupert Murdoch versus Facebook? As
Oops, I think you've dropped out. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, great. So that's the irony of all of this, is that it's taken the news organizations who themselves have been the dominant players in this space to actually help the government pick a fight with Facebook. And just to understand, this is the legislation. Oops, this is the legislation. I don't know if you can see it. It's 56 pages, of which what's very interesting on Lou's point is that about 40 of the pages deal with how do the news organizations settle a price with Facebook for the news. And my initial reaction to that was fairly negative. Why would our House of Representatives spend so much time writing legislation to protect these news organizations that they've been having fights with themselves for such a long time? But the positive way of looking at it now, I think, is that this is a V1. This is V1 legislation. This is V1 legislation about how do the data providers, whether they be news organizations, brands, influencers, or my 89-year-old mum, how do they get protected, and how do they get in some way reimbursed for the interesting news that they provide? And I think, Brittany, you're nodding your head. I think where you and I would like to see this is V1 legislation in Australia becomes V2 legislation, maybe in Australia or somewhere else, that ends up with some of the rewards that these platforms receive coming back to the actual news providers. And news providers are not just Rupert Murdoch and the news organizations. They're really everyone. And that brings me to sort of my core belief, which is we all need to be able to control this data that up until 10 years ago, we didn't realize we could provide. But every one of us is a very interesting data provider. And I think we're at a V1 stage, and that's what I like about the Australian legislation.
And so now, where do you think we go from here? Brittany, what do you think kind of the next, are there any next Australias coming up on the horizon, or where do you think Facebook is going to do going forward now?
Yeah, I was specifically going to say that I think the Australian model is something that will be replicated, as Jody asked about, replicated elsewhere in places where there are activist legislators who have been looking at different ways of solving this problem for years. I'm actually surprised that I hadn't heard this proposal before. I spend nearly every day doing public talks on panels of experts about disinformation, and no one has ever suggested that Facebook would pay for real news. So I really love that this is how that proposal came out, and the backlash that came against Facebook when they decided to block their real news page. And so it really ignited this global conversation where I think a lot of the activist legislators in different countries around the world who have been finding different ways to pick at the Facebook model would take this type of legislation and look at implementing it in their national legislative infrastructure. I spend most of my time actually helping legislators and technologists work together to make sure that legislation is actually implementable for technology companies, and that we make sure that we can protect the users in the end from bad actors, right? So I think that this is one of the best proposals that I've seen in terms of how do we deal with the problem of big tech monopolies, how do we deal with their influence on society and make sure that there's less opportunity for negative influence. So being able to empower real news organizations who have taken a massive hit to their bottom line due to the distrust in real news, and also due to the lack of people looking elsewhere besides platforms like Facebook for real information. And those bottom lines really need to be supported, because we can't be in a position where most of the professional journalists, the researchers around the world, that information cannot get into the hands of common citizens. So this is a really great proposal, and I myself will definitely be talking to the legislators that I work with about their thoughts on this and whether or not they would propose it in the United States.
That's
And,
perfect. Yeah.
and Lou, if I may add to what Brittany has said, what's super interesting is that this fight has woken up consumers. This fight has woken up the small business next door, and it's.
And I mean, you say that, and because I personally became aware of this in 2003. This issue when I started running Bolt. We were the largest social network in the world before MySpace, and we would do surveys, and we were told how important data privacy was. So we created a bunch of tools, and nobody used them. So I think there's. Yeah.
So that's the point. The point is that people have been woken up to the fact that a Silicon Valley-based service provider controls the algorithm that serves them news. And many people are now going, that is not okay. But the issue that we have, when you say what's next, the issue that we have is how do you control your news feed, and do you understand what that means? And most consumers right now have been woken up to the issue, but don't really know what it means to control their newsfeed or control their own data. And part of that, can I just finish? Part of that problem is that GDPR, this thing called GDPR and this thing called CCA, which is regulation to help control end user data. It is not. It also is in V1, and so if I was to download my data from Facebook, which is about 5 clicks buried into Facebook, or download my data from Twitter or Google, it comes back to me as a blob, this big blob that I don't know what to do with. And so we need to design tools and applications that help people take their data from these platforms and turn them into applications that they feel that they have control over. And we're at very early stage with that. And so we'll see, in parallel, we'll see V2 legislation, and we'll see apps that allow people to take this sort of blobs of data that come out of GDPR and CCA and actually control their own digital identity.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a commercial for BIGtoken, actually, because that's exactly what we're doing. So we got to catch up. So Gilbert, again, you've been focused on this, and now that you've seen what's happened in Australia, where do you think we're going?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is that I've talked about there's been a kind of absence of evidence about exactly what's been going on, because it's also opaque. So it's been hard to quantify how much news boosts engagement on Facebook, even though news audiences are an audience that the company sells to advertisers. But you got this huge consolidation of data with very little understanding of how it is sliced and diced. And as Jody was saying, I know from experience that, I mean, what we did at Tap My Data was disprove this idea that, you know, people in general didn't care about their data, or, you know, weren't bothered about privacy. And in fact, I watched a great hack with my 15-year-old daughter recently again, and, you know, she's a social media user, and she was absolutely transfixed. She said, oh my God, I kind of knew this was going on. But the thing is, she acquiesced because she felt disenfranchised, you know. And I think what we're starting to see now, and I think the last US election campaign showed, was it's not just, you know, diving into fake news or following the algorithms that's presented to us isn't just a kind of vicarious thrill, but it also starts to have, you know, when it indicates to others that we hold a certain set of beliefs, it gets really scary. And I'll give one quick example. It happened to me just a couple of days ago. I was reading in The Economist, and I saw this term population replacement. I didn't know what it was. So I Googled it, and as someone who's not far right, when I encountered it, you know, I discovered what it was. After that, I'm now fighting a series of suggested searches and newsfeed items in my Twitter about other far-right conspiracy theories, which I'm not going to give oxygen to here. But, you know, I didn't check it on other social platforms, you know, but, you know, this idea that there's a specific design to kind of radicalize me because I'm a bearded white man of a certain age is in itself a conspiracy theory. But the fact is that this whole lumoscape of platforms and intermediaries exist to make connections which, you know, like blockchain, can start to be manipulated by bad actors, you know, a kind of social 51% attack. And I think that's what gets people really, really terrified. And I think that's what's moving people from acquiescence to activism. And you're absolutely right. You know, tools are the way to chip away at this.
What do you mean by a social 51% attack?
Well, basically, if you think about ad tech, isn't just about monetizing our data, but about monopolizing and monetizing our attention, you know, our screen, you know, our lived digital identities, as Brittany was saying, and you know, the choices and the profiles that we put in start to shape our, you know, our knowledge of the world, and also our life opportunities. Again, you know, lockdown has exacerbated this. It's bounced a whole new section of the population online who lack, you know, from a socio-economic group, who lack the skills to set up pseudo profiles or all the kind of thing that smart people in Silicon Valley do to create chaff. So it's gone from kind of echo chambers to you know, really, really impactful negative consequences for a lot of people.
Wow. So Brittany, since you've been going around for a while now, have you seen, when you're talking to legislators now, have you seen any movement in how they're thinking about things and their readiness to do something?
Absolutely. I think most legislators around the world are starting to realize that if they haven't specifically addressed data protection and privacy in terms of the way that I think a few of us on this webinar like to talk about it, which is data ownership and control, that they need to start really addressing all of the components of that. So firstly, transparency, you know, giving us the right to know what data is being collected about us. Secondly, you know, consent and permission structures, making sure that we are consenting or not consenting to certain things being done with our data, and then that follows through. Obviously, then tracking and traceability to make sure our data isn't being used for purposes for which we did not agree to. And then in the end, the monetization piece, if our data is going to be monetized, that a portion of that will go to us. Now, a lot of the legislation that we see around the world addresses some of the first few components of that. So the transparency to request a copy of our data that's being held on us, transparently be told what is being collected about us, especially simplifying terms and conditions more to a third grade reading level and bullet points so that anybody can really understand that. And give us consent, you know, opt in, opt out. Obviously in the United States, we got the short end of the stick on that. In Europe, obviously it's much more progressed where you are automatically opted out and have to opt in. But the most important and revolutionary part of this conversation is the data monetization piece, so data ownership. There are tens of thousands of companies around the world that exist specifically to own and market our data. There are millions of companies around the world, perhaps tens of millions of companies that likely hold data on all of us in their databases. And those companies usually are holding our data specifically because they're monetizing it, whether they're using it for internal, external strategies, or whether it's literally being directly monetized for advertising purposes, for instance. There is value, exponential value that's being created, a multi-trillion-dollar industry around the world, and us as the data producers, us as the producers of the world's most valuable asset class, we don't have rights to that value in most countries around the world, but we're starting to. A lot of the legislators I'm working with are starting to see that if we can give everybody around the world the opportunity to own a portion of the value of their data, that's the fastest ticket we have to curing extreme poverty, especially over the past year where we're seeing, 30% plus unemployment rates around the world. And we're starting to talk about the future of work and what are we actually going to do to make sure that everyone can at least feed themselves and their families. Well, you certainly right now today can make enough money to buy your groceries with your data every single day. That's actually easily done. And I'm always shocked when people argue against that. I feel like they don't know enough about the data industry.
I think people don't get that yet, Brittany. People don't understand that that's how powerful they can be. And this fight with Facebook in Australia, I think, is waking people up to really the power of their data. And when people realize that, data privacy is not about privacy, it's about control and how they can use their data, I think that will be a big awakening. The whole thing, with data privacy in inverted commas reminds me of how politicians during COVID have talked about staying safe. It's emotive, and it's not so much about privacy for me. It's about getting people to realize that their data is powerful.
Yeah, it's an empowering conversation. And I think too often people get caught in the weeds between privacy and data protection. I like to always say, I'm a data rights activist. I care about protecting data. I'm not saying everyone keep your data to yourself and let's destroy the future of data science, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, smart cities. Like, that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm saying if there is certain information that you would like to keep private, especially your personally identifiable information that should be protected in an encrypted digital identity, yes, you should have the right to keep that private. But everything else you should be able to safely, securely, and consensually share anonymously and earn the money that you deserve off the back of that.
So one of the things that marks the webinars that we do is we get audience participation for the Q&A section. So in a few minutes, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If you have one, put it into the Q&A. And if we pick the question, we will actually make you a panelist and you'll get to come up, open up your mic, open up your camera, and ask the panelists directly the question. But before we do that, so Gilbert, when do you think there are other countries, and again, because I got back to this, I'm not sure how much of this was, Australia versus Facebook as opposed to Murdoch versus Facebook, and if there are other countries that you think are really on the precipice of doing something, maybe even more aggressive than what Australia did.
Well, I think, Europe started the ball rolling with all of this. I remember when I first got into this stuff, it was always known as the EU GDPR, and it very quickly lost that prefix. It's kind of become the gold standard. But I've become frustrated about how, a lot of, I think a lot of priv tech as it exists sort of comes out of a privacy village where data monetization is viewed almost as a kind of a dirty activity. And I think that this option, this idea that you can make money from your data, and that things like decentralized data markets allow data to find its true value, are the rocket fuel in all that. And I think Europe has, we've seen Google in particular start to behave like a regulator, but with like way more lawyers than cash. And I think the current anti-competition investigation, along with developments like the Digital Markets Act in Europe, is a real sign that Europe is moving ahead, actually influenced by, California's much more sort of pragmatic, granular approach to data privacy. They've said, we need to open APIs for data to bust the silos, otherwise none of this is going to work. but also to try and engender things like data unions to get people together to bargain for their data and its value collectively, because together we're stronger. And again, it belies the idea that people don't want to have control and engage more directly with their data, and sure, make some money of it from a position of individual agency. So I think Europe's California's stolen a lead recently, and Australia's tackling it from another angle. But everywhere, the different aspects of these platforms' business models, which are monetized exclusively on personal data, pretty much, are being opened up, and that's a very exciting time to live in.
Undoubtedly. Jody, is the Australian government done now, or as you think there's more that they're going to be doing?
Well, that's why I was perhaps optimistically saying that I think this legislation is V1. Hopefully there'll be V2. What's very clear is that a lot of people have been woken up by this. I'm amazed at the number of people who have said to me how reliant they were on Facebook, not just for news, but to actually run their little businesses. And they're voters, and they'll make what they feel known to their representatives, and hopefully we'll see another version. Hopefully Australia can lead the way in this regulation, and we'll end up with diversity in these platforms, because at the end of the day, what regulators want is diversity. And right now we have absolutely the opposite of diversity when it comes to these networks.
Undoubtedly. So we're going to take the first question from the audience to bring up on stage. This is from Mark Caruso. So Mark, if you can unmute your camera or unmute your microphone and turn your camera on, that would be terrific. Let me see, there are actually two Mark Carusos here, so I assume, let's see, maybe now the second one is the one. There you go. So Mark.
Hey, Lou, can you hear me now?
Hey, yep. Hey,
oh,
welcome.
Great. Hey, Lou, thanks to you and the panel for putting this together. Really very interesting topic and great discussion. So the question I have is, obviously BIGtoken's kind of leading the way in entrepreneuring this getting paid for your data initiative. So, let's fast forward now, hypothetically, if sweeping legislation is passed in say the United States, how would a small company like BIGtoken compete against these tech giants like the Facebooks and Googles of the world, who are obviously going to take advantage of that situation and with their deep pockets and extensive teams roll out their own data collection platforms?
I think really what we're looking at is fully embracing crypto as a technology, moving everything to the blockchain. Whatever data we collect via our app, we'll put onto the blockchain. I want to get to one click, come take it off, and then have this blockchain. We'll be making some announcements about this. But let other parties, and we're already talking to other parties, come and put their data on the blockchain. Let brands come and put their data on the blockchain. And by the way, you might want a brand to have lots of data on you, if it's a brand that you really care about, right? But you should be in control of that. And there should be apps, let all kinds of different apps develop, to help people get monetized for that, all kinds of different ways. We're just barely scratching the surface. But I think, if you look to the future, I don't want us controlling it, quite honestly, any more than I want Facebook or Google controlling it, right? This is the data should belong to the people, and they should decide how it's used, when it's used, how it's monetized. And I don't think that you can accomplish that outside of leveraging, blockchain.
And I'd love to jump in to just talk about the competition in the space. As someone who personally has been begging Facebook for 3 years, almost to the day, to allow people to own and monetize their data. In fact, when I became a whistleblower, I was making a very specific decision, which is that I had been invited to come to Facebook headquarters to advise Facebook's Libra project, where at the time I believed that they were creating a token so they could pay people for their data. And I wanted to be there to help advise that project and explain to them how to go about it. And when I saw the actual business model, that it was instead going to be to track and trace everyone's financial data, I went to the Guardian instead and whistle blew on them. So I have been begging them for years to take this seriously and to recognize how valuable people's data is and to just give them a dividend, a data dividend, a small percentage of it. Even if Facebook owns 70 or 80% of the value that we all create in the Facebook platform, Mark says our data is worth $17 a quarter because he doesn't want people like us to care about it. But the 2 billion people around the world that live on less than $2 a day, $17 a quarter would change their life. And I saw that someone specifically said, how much is my data worth a day? Well, Mark wants you to think that it's worth less than $1 a day, but that's just Facebook. Think about all of the other places that you are creating data at all times every single day, and the exponential amounts of data that we're all now creating because we've been forced to lead a nearly 100% digital life over the past year. I talked to, for instance, healthcare researchers, and they said, if I could get anonymized healthcare data from someone that qualified for my diabetes study, for instance, that data over a 6 to 8 week period of time is worth $28,000 to me. And you start
so Brittany, it was Maddie Greenspan who said, how much is my data actually worth as an individual? And your point, I think the other point is $1 a day is just ridiculous. If a telco knew that yesterday I lost my mobile phone and I was up for switching networks, they'd pay $500 or more for that new acquisition. It's not $1. That's $17 a quarter. I think that's a story, and it's not a good story. Depending on who you are and what stage you're at and what you're doing, your data could be worth $500 a day. If you want to buy a new phone and you want to tell everyone that, networks will pay $500 to sign you onto their network. So we need to build exchanges for data so that the right data at the right time is made available to brands. There's another question here, Lou, about when will brands realize that if they stop spending money with Facebook, that will desperately influence Facebook and how they do things. And so when brands realize that there are other ways to get to Jody when he loses his mobile phone and needs a new one, and they stop spending their money with Facebook, that will make a huge impact.
Yeah, we saw the impact of hashtag Stop Hate for Profit, started by Roger McNamee and a lot of other great activists in the space. And it did have a huge impact for a long period of time. So it's really gaining that mass adoption where enough notable companies that affect the bottom line of Facebook actually decide to take that leap.
Mm.
So where do you think, if you were Facebook, and I'm sure you talked about this, Gilbert, what would you do? I mean, how do you solve this? It's very hard, obviously, being the arbiter of truth. I think, now they're talking about putting together this panel of people who are going to decide if Trump comes back to Facebook or not. I don't know. Have you guys got suggestions on what Mark should do? Because this is a hard issue. And Mark has shareholders that that he's beholden to. So if his engagement is going down, that puts him in a tough place to not maybe let the fake news come back.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to hear what Brittany was saying about the whole Libra, and that was a real missed opportunity, because all the building blocks exist, in terms of, we're starting to get tools for consumer grade tools for data collection. We've got crypto as a payment rail. You've got open, nascent, decentralized markets for data to find its real value. And Mark and co could have shepherded everyone into that. It seems that boat sailed. If Google is trying to sort of be the adult supervision in the tech space, then Facebook, I think, is suffering really now from its reputation of obnoxious teenager, constantly apologizing after borrowing the car and then doing it again, which is starting to hamper them. I think what's interesting more recently is that Facebook is claiming, I think quite successfully, to be the voice or the forum for small businesses. And I think there's some logic in that, because but it's difficult to pull off because of their reputation and the fact that they did contribute to the demise of the things that I knew as a yeah, as a child and a young person, like local newspapers, listings, flyer, like leafleting companies. I think what's interesting is
Have you noticed a shift to, I'm sorry, didn't go.
Okay. No, I was just saying, I think the the cat's out of the bag, and I think it probably will be the saving of Facebook, that they're going to have to look at, wean themselves off big advertisers and look to doing more for the communities that at the moment have got no alternative but to get together, monetize, and do things on Facebook. These things, Facebook and other platforms have replaced the humane structures that we were used to, and I think that's going to be finding ways to monetize that, whether it's creating Facebook style data unions might be the way, or kind of going back to the old business models like Yellow Pages here in the UK.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. We got our next question is from Lloyd Coubertin. Lloyd, you want to unmute and turn on your camera?
Absolutely. Come on, video.
So close. That's okay.
Okay, it says it's unable to detect my video, but you can hear my voice. So first, I've been on BIGtoken since October, so I appreciate all the things I'm learning about my data. I'm 62 years old and still probably out there on sites I don't even know about. My question is, how do the comment from Brittany about putting food on our table means a lot to me. I work for a local union here in Portland, Oregon on food issues that people have, just putting food for their kids or for themselves every single day. How do we get this information out there that this is important, that people can monetize that data? And how do we do it as we have learned through the pandemic and homeschooling? Not everybody has the same internet abilities and access. How do we take and help society get to that issue where food is on the table by monetizing their own data? And thank you, guys.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Happy to jump in there on this one. I really believe that the mass adoption of these types of technologies, where what I'm seeing in the market like BIGtoken, are applications that are easy to use, so anyone would be able to download this on their phone. I've even seen some applications that are being used in, for instance, like Latin America and Africa, where even if you have a very basic device, that there is a way to have an application that will help you monetize and transfer value digitally. So when there are easy to use, accessible technologies that allow you to monetize your data instead of just giving it away for free, which is what we've been used to our entire lives, I believe that mass adoption is going to go a lot faster than it is today once people start to understand how to use that. It's one of the reasons why I spend a lot of my time doing digital literacy education, specifically with parents and teachers and kids, helping get these education programs into schools that teach you how to use these technologies, for you to understand what your data rights are and basic cybersecurity protocols, explaining to you what your digital footprint is and how valuable that data is, and what the data industry actually looks like, and how you can participate in these types of new economies, I would say, where we as the producers of the world's most valuable asset finally have a way to protect ourselves, but also to empower ourselves, which I think is even more important. Privacy conversation goes to protection, but the empowerment and being able to take back some of that value and continue to earn it on a daily basis is really what I see as the best next step.
As Lloyd, did that answer the question?
That did. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for the
Thank you,
question.
Lloyd.
So look, this has been great. We try and keep the calls down to an hour, so we're down to now the last 10 minutes. Jody, I'll start with you. Where would you like to see the industry, moving forward? Both, do you think we got regulators? We have, all of these, what I call FAMGA: Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. and then you have kind of this whole kind of blockchain crypto world. Where do you think we're going to be if we're talking about all of this in a year?
I think for an end user, for a citizen of Australia, for a citizen of any state that's worried about this issue, it starts with, we need to build frictionless ways for them to take the data that they have collected on Instagram, Facebook, Google, or wherever, frictionless ways for them to take that data and then organize it in ways that give them back the analytics and the power that they have given to these platforms. Now, what does that mean? That means let's start with my digital identity. I want to put my digital identity on my own domain. So it starts with people. When you own your own domain on the internet, it means that you're controlling everything that happens when that domain is entered into a browser.
And that's the .cred domain.
Say again.
That's the .cred domain.
Yeah. So we own a number of domains. We own .ceo and we own .cred, and we're building ways for people to take their data from these platforms and share that data with their friends and find insights from that data on their own domain and take control of their digital identity. So, it's the beginning of that revolution for people. And what's really cool, I mean, the good news is that Facebook has taught people to make connections, and Google has taught people to search, and smartphones have given people the method to do this all the time. So we have all of the tools that have educated people on how they can control their own digital identity. And so we now arrive with others to show them how they can manage their digital identity on their own domain.
And that's terrific. Where do you think, Gilbert? I'll let Brittany have the last word. Where do you think that, where do you think we'll be in a year, and where would you like us to be?
I think there is a really exciting opportunity, having come from the kind of the privacy village and dipped into, the made the transition to the crypto world. It's evident to me that, crypto seeks and needs regulation, and the current data platforms need mediation. And any industry that calls its customers users is in a bad situation, and there needs to be a lot of change. And I think that data and the tools that have been established in kind of DeFi space are the way out of that. We all, not all of us have crypto, but we all have data. And, if I can use my phone to start to take back my data that's dissipated in 100+ different organizations, or even to understand it more, I can start to rebuild that kind of trust that's missing. I think Lloyd, who came in with a question, really hit it on the head. I think something that's sometimes overlooked because we all love shiny tech is digital skills. And like Brittany, I spent some time working in adult education, so contributing to an adult education program that the UK government was doing around baking digital skills, starting with security and then going straight to privacy as well, into part of the packages that they did as part of social care and programs for the long-term unemployed. I think that's been blown off course a little bit by the whole COVID, understandably, but I think investing in digital skills for that whole new raft of the population who found themselves on this burning platform, is going to really help a lot of the the economic and the social ills that we're seeing now.
Yeah, from your mouth. So Brittany, obviously I know you've got a lot of thoughts about this, but where do you think we'll be in a year, and where would you like us to be?
So I think there's 3 different fronts that we're really moving on. That would be education, new legislation and regulation, and then technology. So on the education front, I would say digital literacy is now becoming a topic that even national, public school curriculums are starting to take on board. There's a new IEEE global standard called DQ, which, just like IQ or EQ, is a digital intelligence quotient. It's been worked on through research over the past 10 years with a lot of the world's top technology universities, think tanks, government ministries, and departments of technology and innovation. And this DQ index gives you a DQ score. And there are curriculums that help you understand what your DQ score is, and then give you all of these different modules that help you improve upon that. And so that's originally designed for kids. And then I specifically, through my Own Your Data Foundation, do work on parent and teacher training programs and translating that for different age groups. Especially I'm looking at translating it for government and professional training, because especially these days, you know, I suppose your biggest cybersecurity risk are all of your staff employees that are at home using unregulated devices, right? But for kids, we actually have the opportunity to teach them how to use technology in the best way, with their best foot forward. You know, we weren't taught how to use a computer and actually taught how it works. We were told, here's a keyboard, here's how you type, here's how you use a browser, and how you search for something, how you send an email. We weren't told everything that you type in the search browser is being recorded and then traded around the world. And you can never delete that, and it's always going to be connected back to you. That I think we would have made different decisions in our lives. So implementing those digital literacy programs and teaching the value of data and how to protect it, I think is going to really serve us well in the long term. I hope it doesn't take a generation for this to really sink in with people, but I really think that we have to start with the youngest of kids and make sure that those touching technology for the first time really understand what the issues are and how to protect themselves, but also be successful. On the legislative and regulatory front, I really do believe that some of these data dividend laws and bills and experiments where the data dividend is providing you with your universal basic income, or I like to say universal earned income, because it's our value that we have earned with our time and attention and just being valuable human beings every day. So I really think that some of that is going to start to prove to actually go through, and then we'll be able to have smaller models that actually prove that we can grow those. I know that Andrew Yang's planning on doing that in New York. There are some of those programs coming out possibly in Miami. Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to do it with the entire state of California. So I really do see hope for that, especially when I advise legislators in countries like Mexico and India. They really see data ownership as their only opportunity to bring everyone in their countries out of extreme poverty. So I do think we will start to see those, what could be considered a social experiment, but really, you know, from legislation downwards, actually proving those models sometime soon. And the last point is obviously technology. You don't need legislation or regulation if there is technology that people can use to own and control their data. Obviously, if the law says that companies have to allow us to own and control our data, then that cedes a lot of the value that we've already put out back to us. But if we have technologies to encrypt our data and have those permission structures, have that tracking and traceability, and use those smart contracts so that we can automatically be compensated for the data we produce, then we are owning our data without having to wait for legislators to tell us that we should. So I really believe that, you know, solutions like BIGtoken are really going to be the way that gets our first foot in the door, where there's enough people that start to see the value of this. And I definitely think, based off of the success of platforms like Brave Browser, for instance, or voice.com instead of Facebook, when we start to see blockchain-based solutions that are actually rewarding people for their time and attention, those are going to start to gain in popularity once people realize, oh, well, I could use an extractive platform, or I could use a platform and then go pay for my lunch with it. It's very straightforward. And so the easier that we make those technologies more accessible, we make those technologies, the faster mass adoption will grow.
Well, I think that was incredibly well said. Just last real quick question. I know you're from Houston. Is that where the hat's from as well?
Yeah, this is an Austin hat, actually. I live in Austin now.
Okay. Yeah, Austin has great hats. So I thought this was a great hour. You know, thanks, Jody. Thanks, Gilbert. Thanks, Brittany. This was terrific.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks a lot. Thanks,
It's a
Lou.
pleasure.